Today is February the 4th. I'm interviewing Paul G. Moss at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia for the Veterans History Project. If I could get you to state your name and your branch of the service.
My name is Paul G. Moss, M-O-S-S, and I'm a junior. The branch of service was the Marine Corps Reserve. I went into what I do.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist yourself?
I enlisted as a reserve in June of 1941 prior to Pearl Harbor. I was very close to being drafted, but I beat the rap by joining the service that I wanted.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your life before the service. What, if you were working, if you were in school, what your family life was like prior to enlisting.
Good. I grew up as a son of a railroad agent who moved up and down the tracks. I spent most of my formative years in Buena Vista, Georgia, but I graduated from Troy, Alabama High School, finished at the University of Alabama in 1940, and went to work for the Southern Bell Telephone Company in 1940. I was transferred to Birmingham in 1941. There in about June of 1941, I knew that I was close to being drafted. So I looked around at several services and decided to go into the Marine Corps, primarily because my mother's brother was a Marine in World War I, and he died of an illness at Paris Island. Is that it?
Did you have any friends that you joined with, or had you made the decision just on your own? Was there a group of you, or?
Oh no, I was alone.
Uh-huh.
I just primarily wanted to beat the draft and select my service. So I joined early. That's about 6 months prior to Pearl Harbor. Not anticipating going into service, but selected my service.
Did you have any special interest going into the service, or areas that you were looking to specialize in, or did they assign you?
I had no choice, no desire to make a choice other than the Marine Corps, except that there was an officer's candidate class for which I was enrolled. And so I did go to the officer's candidate school in Quantico, Virginia, when I came on active duty.
When you first signed up with the reserves, how soon after that did you go to training?
I signed up in June of 1941, and shortly after Pearl Harbor, I got a call to show up fast. And so I reported. They had orders for duty on January of 1942. I went to Quantico, Virginia. I don't get ahead of your story, but I went to Quantico, Virginia to the Officers Candidates class, the 5th Officers Candidates class of the Marine Corps. After our class began, it was shortened from 13 weeks to 9 weeks due to the urgency of having fellows overseas. After finishing the Officers Candidates class, I was sent to the Reserve Officers class for several weeks in Quantico in the Marine Corps schools. I finished that about June of 1941. When I was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, to get training as a communications officer. I guess that I spent about 9 weeks at Fort Benning getting that training before going to active duty, active troop assignment in about October of 1942. A side item is that during the time at Fort Benning, which was very close to my home in Andalusia, I went to Andalusia several weekends, and there I met Inez, who I later proposed to and married. I visited with her on the way from Fort Benning to Camp Pendleton, California, stopping at Waco, Texas for several days. I reported to Camp Pendleton on about October or November of 1942, I'm sorry, and was assigned to the 12th Marines, an artillery unit of the 3rd Marine Division. That would have been in about November of 1942. I may be getting far ahead of the story, but we was put aboard ship in January of 43, I guess it was, and sent to New Zealand, my entire division. I think we were sent to New Zealand because the Japanese had made such a run in the South Pacific that the people of New Zealand were a little bit squeamish about having protection. All of their men had been with the British in South Africa as part of that troop, and so they didn't have many men and many defenses there. We stayed there for several months before going up to Guadalcanal, which was, beg your pardon? Oh yeah, in New Zealand, we carried on some maneuvers. This is probably going to Guadalcanal. The last maneuver we had was going up into the country of the natives. I think they were the Maoris of New Zealand, and to shoot our artillery. During this time, one of the units, Baker Battery, called our colonel and told him that they had just barbecued a wild pig, and would he come and join them for the feast. He delightedly did so, having been with a family on a wild pig feast earlier. And they knew of his desire. It turned out that the next morning after the feast, the regimental commander called Colonel Letcher and asked him, said, "What in the world are you doing killing this farmer's pig? And not only that, but you tore down his fence to cook it." The colonel was just aghast because this had been pulled on him, and it was a true thing. I don't think he took any punishment for it, but that was the case. Shortly after that, we went up to Guadalcanal. The island was still being strafed by the Japanese, and this was in the time of the Kennedy episode in Tulagi in the Solomon Islands, where his boat went down. We were there in a coconut grove, and constantly fearing that some Japanese would be coming towards us. It never happened, but we did get the strafing almost every night from the Japanese aircraft.
Now, what type of facilities had much been built there in terms of a base yet, or?
Oh no, I'm glad you asked this. In New Zealand, we had wooden decks and tents on top of the wooden decks, so we had fairly comfortable arrangement. But when we got to Guadalcanal, we had only tents to spread, and we put our tents were located on a coconut grove, which had been commercially owned, I'm sure. And we stayed there until we got aboard ship to go on an operation. But that was pretty crude, and yet there were some prominent visitors. I don't know who. I think Ms. Roosevelt came, but there were quite a few prominent visitors that came. I didn't hear any of them.
Was there much of an airfield yet there at that time, or were they still building it too?
They had just completed that airfield, Henderson Field, I guess it was. It's the only one there, I think. And it was, of course, actively used. There was a need for giving our fighters additional airfield so that they could protect, they could strafe the New Guinea area, I guess it is, in the upper part of the Solomon Islands. So we were sent to Bougainville, landed there on about the 1st of November, 1943. And this is a volcanic island, a very crude position there. We went aboard a sandy beach, and of course were strafed by the Japanese there almost every night. We came into some torrential rains there and bogged down up to our knees in the sand. And if we dug our foxholes, they were filled up with water because of the torrential rains. And so when the Japanese would come strafing, most of us didn't hesitate to jump into the water-filled foxholes. But the next morning we'd get up and find holes all in the sand where they had gotten tree bush of their bombs, and they were scattered all over the area. So we were very fortunate that none of those fragments hit us. But we were there so that the CBs could come and build an airfield. The fighters from Guadalcanal needed protection to fly into New Guinea. We built one airfield, and then we built a second airfield. That was, or rather the CBs did. My job was a telephone and radio officer, and so we were constantly having trouble with our wires and used to direct the guns and their firings. Our forward observers stayed with the advanced troops and telephoned instructions about firing back to the gun positions. We built a second airfield there, and we were disturbed one day by looking out and seeing this ground just wave. It looked like it was rolling water. And it was, of course, earthquake, I guess you call it, earthquake. And we did have a mountain there that came in for some fun. Our people told the colonel that they could see the gun that was firing at us. We were getting shot at by artillery pieces from the Japanese. We had landed on the side of the island opposite from where they were based. So when they got in position to see us. They were shooting artillery toward us. When we kept shooting our rifles and our howitzers to this place that was being directed by the forward observers, it finally became aware that we were not going to reach it with our artillery. The colonel finally asked the observer, says, "What are you shooting at? You're shooting at the volcano?" And of course that's what they were shooting at. So we had mistaken it. I guess that we were there through the first of the year, and as soon as we had gotten the airfields built, the fighters started coming in very fast.
And that would have been in early 44?
That would have been, the landing was in 43, wasn't it? I said, and yes, and out of 44 we left there. And went back to Guadalcanal for bivouacs. The next operation, we knew in advance where it was, and they had showed us maps of it and showed us that there was going to be a very heavy bomber base there. We had no idea what a very heavy bomber was, but when we got to to that operation, it turned out that we were aboard ship, and for about a month we went back and forth close to the Marianas every night so that we could go in and support the 4th Division that had landed there, because they didn't know whether they would need us or not. And at night, if they didn't need us, we'd turn around and the ships would go back out to sea. Finally, after about 20 days, we went back to Inuiatok, and we were allowed to get off the ship and to go aboard and to bathe in the water and that atoll. And we loaded up, and instead of going to Guam on the 19th of June, which had been planned, we went in at about the 19th of July, that delay having been to support the Marianas. We went to Guam, and again we landed on a beach which was opposite the ones from where the Japanese were. It was a very unlikely spot with coral reefs going extensively, or 500 or 600 yards out into the water. So the water was very low. When the low tide was down, we could walk on the coral reef. This made the landing rather difficult, so our landing craft usually went into the freshwater inlet where the creek came out so that we could get ashore without too much exposure on the coral reef. On that, going up that, after we got out of the landing craft, we were in the early phases with the general and the advanced guards going ashore so they could direct the infantry. We went in to establish artillery support for them. And so to get to our regimental headquarters, a fire control center, we went up this little creek, or several hundred yards, and established a fire control spot where we could direct our artillery support of the infantry when they came in. This was fine, and we were there for about 5 days, and we were feeling very comfortable about it. We had no contact back at that far with the Japanese, and all of a sudden they had overrun all of the infantry ahead of us and were overrunning our position and the hospital and the division headquarters. As a matter of fact, one of my good friends was killed in that attack from the Japanese. Unfortunately, I was out doing my morning duties when they became shooting, and one of the fellows remember very much the fact that I had to run from the latrine with my pants down. But it was a very fortunate thing. We came through it fairly well. Earlier, when I was coming ashore, I had been under fire from grenades, and a grenade hit my knapsack, which I had tossed aside and hidden behind a tree. But they hit the knapsack, and the only thing that survived was a picture that I had of Inez, which I had taken overseas with me. I still have that, and we have it bent in that frame showing that attack. But I didn't have any damage from it. I came out safely. I guess it took us 25 or 30 days to secure our position there. Then we moved on up into a more comfortable Coconut Grove area. We stayed there. The infantry carried out some mopping up operations of stragglers in the Japanese fire. We found a tremendous amount of Japanese food, and many of us had a tendency to eat that food because it was some of the best we had seen. We were constantly warned that we should be very careful because it could be poisoned.
Now, I want to just for a moment get a time frame on this, that this is taking place, that you're moving on to this point where this is going on. This is in...
We landed about, I think it was July the 19th, maybe.
Okay.
And the counterattack came about 5 days later after we'd gotten ashore. 20 days later, we moved on inland to a more secure spot.
Okay.
On the opposite side of the island, we had, our infantry carried on mop-up operations.
Okay, so that would have been later, like around August or September.
Right, yeah. And we were very comfortable at Guam and had secured the entire island pretty well, although some stragglers were found several years later, I think. We stayed at Guam until about February of 45, I guess it was, January, February of 45, when we went ashore to, and incidentally, before I leave it, I want to say that I did go up to the airfield at Guam and see the very heavy bombers, which was the B-29s that had come there and what we're going to use to shoot at Japan, carry bombs to Japan, which brought up the next operation. We went up to Iwo to give the airplanes a landing spot. We were losing B-29s because they'd run out of gas, or they'd be hit by anti-aircraft weapons. But we went up to Iwo Jima, and we were the third, although our division was the third division, we were also the third division that was ashore there, because two other Marine divisions were in the initial contact. We were a reserve and went ashore the fifth day at Iwo Jima. On that fifth day, maybe it was the fourth day, the flag was raised at Iwo, and we saw it from the shipboard, but we landed that same day, I think, and that capture of that high point and giving the flag there took the Japanese observation of us away to a degree, so that they could not train the artillery in on us. We were an artillery unit too, and we went over the island to the opposite side from where we landed is a couple of 100 yards. It's a very small island. And established gun positions and fire control units. And we stayed in that position. It was right under the airfield for the time that we were there, some 20 to 25 days. We were there to see the first aircraft land on the airstrip, which was quite a cheerful point, and got cheers from everybody from seeing that aircraft safe. I understand that about 2,000 aircraft landed there before in this next few months. So you can see that was with 10 or 12 guys aboard on each aircraft. You can see that was a significant number of people that we helped out by having that island. Now this was, of course, I left there in late March of 1945 and went back to Guam, where we were in supposedly a retreat and rest spot. But about 5 days after I'd been there, the colonel came to me saying, PG, how soon can you be ready to go to the States? I told him in 15 minutes. And so he says, well, be in the Jeep at 2 o'clock because that airplane going and back to Hawaii, you want you to get on it. So I went up to, and of course delighted to find that I could get back to the States. I left everything that I had there. But I got aboard this aircraft. There was no air control on it at all. It was just, and so when we got up to 20,000 feet, it was pretty cold. And we flew to Johnson Island in Hawaii. In Hawaii, I stayed for about 5 days waiting for transportation to the United States. I got back in early April to San Francisco from Honolulu. And immediately I couldn't get Inez on the telephone in San Francisco, so I went on down to the Los Angeles area where she was, and waited for, what's that? Yeah, I had to buy uniforms in San Francisco to be civilized again. And went down to, what is your name of your? Santa Ana, to El Toro base where Inez was stationed. I waited until she got in, and we finally got together, and I stayed there for about 4 or 5 days.
But she had no idea that you were gonna show up.
Oh no, she could. There was no way I could get that word to her.
So she came back, or she came in, and you were just sitting there waiting for her.
Something like that. I had a real good friend who had given me the name of his family in Santa Ana, so I had a place to stay, and they were delightful. The Barnes family gave me a place to stay while I was there, and they even loaned us a car, didn't they? They gave us a car that Inez and I visited San Bernardino and the mountains over there in the San Bernardino area. And the
have a picture of us on their first night back having dinner at San Bernardino.
yeah, not San Bernardino. It was that first night. It was that overlooking the ocean, wasn't it? We went.
This wasn't, well, no, it was not San Bernardino. It was over Alpha Laguna.
Yes.
Down
Long Beach.
Long
And then we went on over to
Palm Springs.
Palm Springs and the whole area there, the berry farm, Knott's Berry Farm. We just had a nice time for 4 or 5 days. Then I left her and came back to my home in Andalusia, Alabama, to visit my parents before going to Quantico. I had orders to go into the Marine Corps schools at Quantico, where I served as an artillery instructor, communications artillery instructor, to an officer's class at Quantico. There I was when BJ Day came. Inez was up, and I got, because of the high number of points that I had immediate deactivation orders, I think on the 9th of September, some such day as that. And so I was sent home fast. We did have a wonderful opportunity of seeing the huge parade in Washington with about as many aircraft over Washington as I've ever seen. It looked like a solid blanket of aircraft over Washington, celebrating the BJ Day and celebrating Admiral Nimitz. I came was back in that time too. So it was a delightful time. I was given my separation orders, and I went to Cherry Point to get Inez, and we went home and planned our wedding, and planned that we would get married and get her out of service.
Now, how did you go about that, getting her to Cherry Point from California?
I just went to the headquarters and asked them how could they do it. I found a fellow who was grudgingly willing to transfer. He wouldn't transfer to the Washington area, but he said that he'd get her back to the East Coast. I didn't know she was going to Cherry Point, but didn't see how I could commute to El Toro very well.
So, how long was it after you got out that she was able to get out? What was the time? How much longer did she have to be in again?
She was out in November, I guess, maybe 2 months. Wasn't it? We went home for.
Well, I think it was probably a shorter time than that, because you came from Quantico down to Cherry Point to meet me, and then we came to Atlanta and on to Andalusia. So I don't know why you stayed there longer, I can't recall that. But anyway, we were there, but when we went back to get me out, it was only about a couple of days. So he had, in the meantime, come reestablish his contact with Southern Bell and was assigned to mine.
I didn't cover that earlier, but I was working with the telephone company when I went overseas. I was in Birmingham, or rather, when I went into service. They gave me a leave of absence, military leave, and I returned to them in Atlanta, and they assigned me to Atlanta for work here after the war. So probably left a lot out, but that's basically.
Well, you might mention that you had 3 brothers who went service to the Marines, and
Absolutely.
Mother and father who really were on their knees a lot because they all came through without a scratch.
Or 3 of us were in the Pacific area at one time, and one was the 4th Division. He was, and I was in the 3rd Division. He was in the Marianas, and I was at Guam, and he he was sent back to Purdue to go to school after his operation, which was shortly after I got back home, I guess. But my mother and father had a rough time because there were three of us in the Marine Corps. One went through the quartermaster service in the Army, so there were four of us all in service.
And there were four children in your family?
That's all, 4 boys.
And every single one of you was involved in the...
Oh, absolutely.
And what was the we talked earlier about your communication with Inez, but what was communication like with your family? How long did it take for them to, or how often were you able to stay in touch with them?
Well, I could stay in touch with them, but I couldn't identify my locations. And so I don't know that they knew where I was until after the fact in their case. And I think that's probably true on his too. She didn't have any idea where I was. But because there just wasn't any, we were censoring. I was a censor. I censored all the mail for fellows. And I didn't say anything about my reunions. I had not kept up with my outfit, but I had about 75 or 80 fellows with whom I was working. I was the communication officer, and they were the wireman and the radio man. Our function was to keep in communications between the forward observers and the gun positions. And so we had to lay wire and use radio. In 1975, I got a call from a fellow, and he said that he was so-and-so, and I didn't know the name, John somebody. He said he was in Jacksonville, Florida, and he said he'd been trying to find me. He said he was in my outfit. And I asked him, I said, well, I'm glad to hear from you. He says, well, Pete Peterson lives right close to you. And I didn't remember Pete, but he told me who he was. So he said they were going to have a reunion in Atlanta very shortly, and they wanted me to come. These were the enlisted fellows. They had been having this reunion for 15, 20 years. After the war, they had it regularly every year, got together. And so they were meeting in Atlanta with Pete, who lived fairly close to me. I went to that in 75, and they meet every year, and I've been several times. I missed the last one, but we still stay in touch. We're down now to about 30 guys, I guess. And so it's harder to get together, but we do stay in touch. As a matter of fact, Pete has written this book, which he says is still a PFC, I think. And this is his wartime experience, and this is a copy which I'll be glad to make. You can have. That's not the autograph one, is it? No. This is another one by a fellow, Jack Cairns, who was a radio operator. He happened to be in the ditch with me when we were under fire going in Guam. And we've since enjoyed swapping stories about it. We still stay in touch with him. I've talked with him in the last couple of months. He wrote this book. This is one that you can have. Also, it's that he wrote, and it's primarily his personal experience as a Marine, and it describes the conditions.
And were these things?
Just magazines. This is a brief history of the 12th Marines. put out by the Marine Corps and then this Marine Corps Gazette. This magazines we happen to keep.
That
Yes.
these came out,
Well,
or during.
This is October 43,
Uh-huh.
and then this was published later, I'm not sure when.
Thought maybe we could just get a,
The date might be on the back. I think most World War II Marines have a copy of that, when they're in that part of the service.
My colonel, battalion commander as the 1st Battalion, was a brother-in-law of a fellow who defended Wake Island. What was his name? The major a Marine major who defended Wake Island when it was under attack, was a brother-in-law of mine.
John Connor's brother.
Oh, yes, and one of the fellows in my outfit was an aircraft observer, an air observer. He went up and spotted targets for our artillery and telephoned them back. He was Connolly, he was a brother of John Connolly of Texas, the governor of Texas. I don't remember his name, we did have it, but
and when you have your reunions, that people are coming from all over the country.
oh yes, California to, and most of them in the Indiana area, and all Middle America, some in Missouri, all over the country. They have met here a couple of times.
We celebrate our 50th anniversary by having a Marine Corps reunion here, and the Petersons joined us in hosting it.
Was there anything else you'd like to add? Any particular information, from your training or your any other just experiences that?
Well, one of the interesting experiences I had was when I flew from Hawaii to San Francisco. I was sitting in the right-hand seat, and in the left-hand seat next to me was this fellow Gagne, who was one of the fellows in the picture of the flag at Iwo Jima. He was one of the 5 fellows that was posed in that. And I had a nice visit with him all the way back. I never did stay in contact with him, which I would have. He was being brought back for selling of bonds, war bonds.
So that raising of the flag at Iwo Jima had an immediate impact. The photo.
Oh yes, it was, and I have a copy that was presented by the photographer to a friend of mine, and so he gave it to me, also passed it along to me, and it was a very symbolic moment, of course, but it was. I think another interesting fact is that at Iwo Jima, one of the largest concentrations of artillery that we've ever had was involved in what we call a rolling barrage. People have described the washboard effect of Iwo Jima as being filled with caves, the Japanese, and it was a very deeply entrenched positions. And so about 60 pieces of artillery were involved in what's rolling barrage. It would raise sights a little bit, and for the Japanese, and this was a tremendous experience for us because it was the Corps artillery and the artillery from 3 divisions was all involved in it.
And I also wanted to mention again, I found it very interesting when you were talking about the flag going up at the time. We think of it being a symbolic photo now, but it was also, as you mentioned, a diversion for for U.S. troops coming in from the Japanese were diverted by that going on, whereas others were coming in.
The point was that Iwo Jima served as an observation post for them. They could see the entire island, and so any time any troops came ashore, they had a perfect sight on where to shoot and defend the island. Getting to the top of the island eradicated that observation post, and there were still many others, and for much fighting was going on another 15 days, I guess, or 3 weeks. But it was quite an event that brought down cheers from the whole island, where all the Marines aboard were delighted to see that flag up. And of course, as you know, there was a smaller flag placed up there originally, and these troops were sent up to pose for this flag after the fact. But it was a very symbolic message to the troops that everybody in the island saw.
One last question I'd like to wrap up with. You both mentioned that you have plans. You're going to the dedication of the World War II Memorial. Are you going to be getting together with any of your Marine friends up there? Do you have any special plans involved for that?
We will communicate with each other about it, but we don't have any plans to be with them. Our family is very much, our 3 adult children are very much wrapped up in the fact that their mother and daddy were Marines, and so they don't let anything happen without letting us know about it.
There are several Marines in the area that we probably will meet, and we hope to generate interest in others coming too, because our daughter has a home. She says we can just party a lot. And there are going to be reunions all over the mall, and so it should be a real fine time. He mentioned that all his men were enlisted men, and it is utterly amazing what they have gone on to do. It's just so proud of them.
One in Atlanta was vice president of the American Cancer Society, responsible for raising funds. Others, and one in Annapolis, is a very successful building contractor, I guess, or a construction contractor, and has done quite well. All of these fellows have done extremely well.
Did a lot of them come back and go back to school?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. And Inez reminded me of a story. We went through Texas and stopped out beyond Fort Worth, wasn't it? And visited one of our guys, and he was quite amazed that she revered me. He says, "Heck, that's not what they call me."
No. We had one reunion in Annapolis, and they have a home overlooking the bay and west of Annapolis. And he said, "Look at all of those houses that have this gray roof on them. They're all mine." That's what we had been. That group went to Washington, and we were trying to find the Iwo Jima Memorial, and we stopped, and of all things, the person that we asked was a Japanese tourist. But it was fun to have the picture of all of these guys at the Iwo Jima Memorial. So they've meant a lot and enriched our lives so much.
They're just as fine as a group of fellows you ever saw in your life. They've been successful. All of them have wonderful mates, wives. We've enjoyed both their wives and them.
Do you keep up through email and
Well, nothing formal, but we do have, they do have annual reunions and, with telephone calls and, communications.
Okay, well, I think we're about at a stopping point here, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off and get it rewound here.